All right, good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. At this time, we're going to ask for a roll call to confirm our attendees. Vice President Bradford?
Here.
Director Rob Perkins?
Here.
Director Jenny Gronwald?
Here.
Director Rachel Rogers?
Here.
Superintendent Mike Merlino?
Here.
Administrative Assistant Lori Stroll?
Here.
And I also believe we have Brian Grimstad joining us this evening. Brian?
I am here.
Great, thank you. All right, at this time, my name is Julie Bocanegra. I'm the board chair, and the time is 5:35 p.m. And under Governor Inslee's Proclamation 2028, in response to the COVID-19 outbreak, temporarily suspends portions of the Open Public Meeting Act. The proclamation requires that all attendance at an open public meeting not take place in person, but occur remotely, including the board directors and the public. Our meeting this evening is conducted via Zoom audio webinar. At this time, I'd like to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, so now that we have that out of the way, we're going to adopt the agenda. We'll entertain a motion to adopt this evening's agenda.
Director Grunwald moves to adopt tonight's agenda.
Director Perkins seconds.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Do all in favor say aye? It's an aye for me. Victoria?
Aye.
Jenny?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
And Rachel?
Aye.
Great. All right. We will go ahead and move on to the board consent agenda. Do we have a motion for approval?
Director Bradford moves to accept the board consent agenda.
Director Grunwald seconds.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye for me.
Aye.
Victoria? Oh, Rachel?
Aye.
No, I jumped in.
Rob?
Aye.
All right, I think we're good. Okay, next is matters reserved for board action. And this evening, it is resolution number 6365. It is a resolution of the Evergreen Public School Board of Directors condemning racism and committing to being an anti-racist school district. So at this time, we have a resolution that Vice President Bradford is going to read. Vic, do you want to go ahead and read that for us now?
I'd be happy to. Resolution number 6365, a resolution of the Evergreen School District 114 Board of Directors condemning racism and committing to being an anti-racist school district. Whereas Black citizens were killed in the United States over the last several months as the latest victims of racism and police violence, and whereas mass protesting is taking place across the country and the world as people refuse to remain silent or complacent about racial injustice, and decades of systemic oppression and abuses have again reached a tipping point. And whereas systemic racism and racial oppression have long led to physical, political, legal, economic, and environmental harm on people of color in the United States and Washington specifically. And whereas incidents of racism are happening not just in other parts of the United States, but they are happening right here. Racial disparities in social health, economic, legal, and academic outcomes exist in Washington, and they exist in Clark County. And whereas the board recognizes and affirms the value and importance of culturally responsive pedagogy and instructional practices, including a curriculum that represents the diversity of our community, state, and country, and accurately honors the contributions of historically marginalized communities. And whereas the Evergreen School District has worked to be a leader on educational equity over the last several years with initiatives including operationalizing and implementing policies that weave our standards for equity in all areas. The board has supported policies and practices in collaboration with stakeholder groups processes for equitable decision-making, supporting student affinity groups, and developing district and building equity teams. Furthermore, we agree that having a diverse faculty and staff reflective of the demographics of our students provides significant value to students of color and all students, and have directed the superintendent to recruit and train employees accordingly. And whereas the Evergreen School District can do more to combat racism and proactively teach anti-racism. Whereas we acknowledge that our students of color, Black students in particular, parents and community members in our district will still report experiencing and witnessing racism and hate speech in our schools. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Board of Evergreen School District number 114 that we condemn racism, racial violence, white supremacy, hate speech, and bigotry in all forms inside and outside of our schools. And we acknowledge that our district's current curriculum, policies, and practices can do better to consistently combat racism and proactively teach anti-racism. And we acknowledge the need for professional development and training to board, district, and building level leaders that focuses specifically on race-based equity, anti-inequity, and cultural competency. And we will work to be actively anti-racist and to dismantle systemic racism in our schools and empower people of color. And we commit to use an equity lens for all future board business, including all future curriculum adoptions as required in board policy. And we'll continue to work towards a more diverse workforce. And we further commit to adopt an equity policy prior to the start of the 2021 school year that is responsive to the students, parents, and staff who have shared their experiences and perspectives over the last year. And we direct the superintendent and all personnel working for the Evergreen School District to interpret the board's results and operational expectations policies consistent with this resolution. And we charge the recently convened equity committee to inform the board through our administrative staff of the district's equity transformation plan with measurable outcomes based on information from a district equity audit and from community forums. And we direct the superintendent to report to the board the results from the district equity audit, including but not limited to findings regarding student academic success, instructional practices, curriculum materials, discipline practices, board policy, hiring practices, employee diversity, and community engagement. Adopted this 30th day of June 2020, and it'll be signed by all members of the board of directors.
Great, thank you.
I wanted to mention that we had another equity resolution that we did in 2017, but we felt like this needed to be stronger and more comprehensive into our actions. So we took the time to really think about and talk about what is the way that we want to go. It really fits in nicely with the work that we've already been doing with our policy development that has our equity statements kind of woven throughout the policies. And it's very evident that we have those expectations, but this gives it a lot more, a concise place to go and look at where we stand on this. I was really pleased that when this was sent out from the board to cabinet, that they were very much in support. We didn't receive any pushback in any way, and they're totally on board with what we're doing and how we feel, which I'm not surprised at, because this equity conversation is not new for us. And so as we continue to move forward with this, I think it's really good that the public have a very clear idea how we feel. and that our staff have a very clear idea of what we believe and what we expect. It is an expectation, and is not really, it's not up for debate. So now the challenging parts come into play as it pertains to working more with the community, getting the audit, and just really being transparent about what's going on. So I'll leave it at that. I'm sure the others have some comments on everything.
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. Yeah, so at this time, if there's any other comments from the other board members or about this resolution.
I would first like to say, you know, there was a lot of work and a lot of input put into this resolution, and I appreciate all of the work that Victoria did in researching and, you know, collaborating and working with Rob to get it written up and Lori in the format that we need. So I really appreciate all the work that you guys did to get this to where it was. There were a couple of variations of it that I know that everybody was working on, and I think that what we landed on is it's really good. I really appreciate it. I also want to just note that it's written on paper. We'll sign it. It'll go in our minutes, but that's not where it stops. And that we are committed to making sure that we continue to direct, you know, the school district with a lens of equity, and making sure that all of our students are being treated equitable, and really making the knowledge of what equality and what equity is and the difference between the two, and the commitment that we have for this. I did want to ask Mike, can you remind me, when is the Clarissa's start date in the new position?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
But
Okay.
she's effectively already been kind of doing both jobs, but the contract year runs July through June.
Okay, perfect. And then I know, I mean, obviously she's not officially starting till tomorrow, but do we have a timeline of when we might be getting back the equity audits, or how long it's
Well,
expected?
she hasn't, we haven't contracted with who's doing it yet, so that'll be time that's put into identifying the vendor for that. But I know that, you know, like Victoria shared, we all reviewed the resolution, and I think her comments were she was ecstatic from the perspective of the board. I know that there's a results policy that the board will work on, and then there's an actual broader district policy. And her thing was just making sure that we had the time to do the audit and start reaching out to the community. I'm sure the audit work will begin as soon as we can get a contract in place and get them in here. So I would imagine some point this summer that would start.
Okay. I would just like to, you know, just kind of have timelines for when we're doing our resolution, just to make sure that we're keeping ourselves accountable as well as we go through this.
Yep.
But yeah, our work is just beginning. So thank you guys very much.
Rob or Rachel?
Rob's on
Robert,
mute.
I think you're on mute if you're saying something.
I am. Rachel, would you like to go ahead?
I just want to say that I really like the statements in the resolution. I like the calls, you know, to action, or the commitment to action that we are going to take. I appreciate, you know, Victoria drafting it. And I think, you know, I'm proud to be a member of a board that feels this way.
Thanks, Rachel. Rob?
There was, I guess, a little story, because over the weekend, after we released the agenda with this document to the public, I began showing it to some friends of mine, and got into some protracted conversations about what it means, and ended up encountering the kind of resistance that I think people often show when the idea of racism is brought up as a subject. It doesn't seem yet to be popular enough to talk about in circles around here. And I said to them, well, we've seen the data, right? We've seen the data over the last at least 6 years. There's been a reporting requirement to separate discipline numbers as one example of what we have to audit out by race. And I said to them, I've seen the data, and it shows that Black African-American students are being disciplined at a higher rate than any other group. American Indian and Alaskan Natives, to use the federal terms, are second most and still higher, and it goes down from there. And when I was able to attest to that, the conversation changed to, oh, okay, so this is a thing. That's why I sent you all the link to the graph that kind of showed that, because I spent my Sunday reassuring myself that I attested to something that was still true, and it's still true. The last school year that we measured, Black students had an 8% discipline rate as compared to 4.4 for all students. So it is happening, and it's data that supports the anecdotes and the other stories and the general assumption from the way the groups representing persons of color make those claims. Those claims are true. They're true. My part in the resolution writing process was mostly editing, and it was kind of joyful to work on it and to be able to come out with as strong a directive statement as I'd hoped for. I don't think there's a way to misunderstand this. And when I showed it to some other officials at the WASDA Legislative Committee meeting, which was held over the weekend here, that was their response. They were thrilled to see that we were going to take a strong and supportive position for this in the name of equity for our students. So we get a lot of support around the state, and I imagine we're going to get some criticism as well. This is going to be difficult, really grueling work. It requires humility. It requires the ability to sit in discomfort and recognize when our assumptions are just not there yet. And I think we're going to start experiencing that more system-wide. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be joyfully difficult. And I'm glad to be a part of that.
Great, thanks, Rob. I just want to again thank everyone for their work on this. Rachel, I think you summed it up great. It's great to be part of a board and a team that has this as a value and wants to do better. The resolution is words. I'm excited to see what actions that we take. And I'm glad that this was filled with actions, because that's what I think will speak louder. And I'm excited to do the work and continue doing the work that is so important. So thank you. And so at that point, unless there's any other comments or questions about it, we will take a motion for approval.
Director Rogers, I move that we approve resolution number 6365 as presented.
Director Grunwald seconds.
All right, all in favor say aye. It's an aye for me. Victoria?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
Jenny?
Aye.
And Rachel?
Aye.
Great. I am happy to say that resolution number 6365 has passed, and now we're going to get to the exciting work that's in it. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, Julie.
Yeah.
I would like to recommend that we get this resolution posted on our website and maybe even on our Facebook page, district Facebook, because I think it's really important that people understand that this has happened. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Okay.
Agreed.
I like that.
I think it should be in a prominent place for a long time to come.
I see Gail is on as an attendee. So
Thank you.
So she's hearing us, and
my assumption is Gail likely will make that. I'm sure that happens.
great.
And then Mike, will you be sending this out to staff like you usually do?
My understanding is that Gail is on. No, yeah, we'll send out an all user saying that the board approved the resolution tonight and send it out. Absolutely.
Great, thank
We
you.
did get an email earlier because when it went live yesterday with the resolution, the community's been able to actually go in and see it. So we did get an email from a teacher earlier that just basically said she was all in. So
Yeah.
I look forward to seeing and hearing more of that too. So I know that some of them have seen it.
Yeah, and Gail just texted me, yes, already on it.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Yay.
Gail.
Thank you, Gail.
All right, anything else before we move on? All right, so next is citizen comments. From my understanding, and I'm going to ask Lori for confirmation, but they had until 3 o'clock today to submit citizen comments. And from my understanding, we did not receive any. Is that correct, Lori?
That's correct.
All right, thank you. So then, since there's no citizen comments this evening, we're going to move on to the superintendent report. Mike, do you have a report for us?
Yeah, so just really quickly, I wanted to, I had shared with each of you individually last, thinking it was Thursday, that we came to a tentative agreement with the EEA in our negotiations on a 3-year deal. And that is significant. First of all, it's significant that it's a 3-year deal. That's a good thing. It's significant because I was thinking about it. I've been around 20 years and I've been involved in negotiations for probably at least 15, 16 of those. And I feel like maybe the first time we negotiated, when I was negotiating back in the days with Jerry Pyland and Jim Schaefer, who was the president, and Leslie Homer was the union rep at that time. I'm pretty sure we came to an agreement in June then. Since then, they've been later in the summer. So getting this done before the end of June was significant because it also allows us to have conversations about how we work together to open school in the fall and make sure that we've got guidelines in place around safety. I can't talk about the specifics. I believe that there's a EEA general membership meeting going on probably, I think right now, possibly. Then they will vote. They have I think they send information out to their members. They anticipate getting their response and ratification, I think, by July 9th, which I think, so that sets us up for July 14th for that approval by the board. I would like to thank both teams, honestly, because this was difficult just from the perspective, it wasn't difficult in terms of relationships. I mean, negotiations are always, I think, there's back and forth, there's highs and lows in any negotiation. But doing this, I think we had one meeting out of all the meetings we had where we were actually in person. So it was all done by Zoom, by email. And when you do that, I mean, you know, in your own experiences, when you're emailing messages or you're having conversations when you're not in the same room, the message doesn't always come across the same way that it would if you were in person, in terms of like maybe something was taken the wrong way. You don't have the opportunity to talk through that, what the meaning was behind it. So I think it's significant that even in that type of an environment, we were able to make this happen. There were a couple times where there were some sidebar meetings that we set up, and anytime that either side asked for that to happen, both sides made that happen. So I really want to thank Bill Bevel, the EEA president, and Lisa Rain, the UNISERV rep. Rob Lutz is still very involved in the negotiation. He was a very key player. Christy Peak, Maggie from Covington, I think it's Linda Campbell, one of our teachers, I think at Sifton, and then Manny, one of our special ed teachers. And I hope I'm not missing anybody, but everybody on the EEA side was very engaged and very helpful in making it happen. And then on our side, Janae Gomes led the team and did a tremendous job, like she always does, in these things and communicating. And there's a lot of work that goes into this, there's no question. Then our team also included Tracy Thompson from the Human Resources Department, and then Bill Oman and Jay Buno, and then I sat in on all of the meetings as well. And so it's just a really great result. Great for our kids. I think that it was fair to both sides. And I know we'll talk about this and some of the details in closed session. And I'm real proud of the work that was done. Really big deal. The workshops to talk about opening schools, so I won't really talk about that. The only other thing I will say is the bond work continues. Everything continues to move forward as planned, as scheduled. So we will have those the three new elementary, Sifton, Image, and Emerald. And then, of course, Marion moving down to the old Image as we tear down. There's no going back because I don't think there's even an old Marion there anymore. I believe that was behind fences at this point, the construction. And then Ellsworth's quite the construction zone as well. I know that there's a meeting tonight with folks around the Mountain View project, and I'm sure that's a Zoom meeting. Sue Steinbrenner was on this for a little while. She switched over to that outreach. And so just a lot of work going on. So you got the work over the summer on preparing to open schools, or how do we open schools, having those conversations, bond work continuing. And then we'll continue to have conversations with all of our bargaining groups on the work around the opening. But really great way to end the year with a 3-year TA with EEA. So that's all I have.
Great, thanks, Mike. Any questions for Mike?
Oh,
Sounds like
just
lots of-
thanks for a good job.
Yeah,
You said they're having their virtual meeting tonight.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what they said last week. I think it was the general membership was the 30th, and then they have to send the ballots out, and then they got to count them, and so it takes a little time for all that.
probably much harder to do when they have to do it through virtual.
Yeah, I think they had one meeting earlier virtually. It was maybe over 3 hours, but then they've got to count, up to 1,700 ballots or so. We've only got to count 5.
That's a good point. Much easier on this side.
Our next meeting is in July on the 7th.
Yeah, next Tuesday night.
The 7th, but we won't have their result by the 7th. But then we have a board workshop on bond update on the 14th.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're going to have an opportunity to have a special meeting at the beginning of that so that we could vote on on the board's vote on accepting the TA with the EA.
Okay.
Their result.
Sounds like a good plan.
All right, great. Thank you. All right, well, with that, there's no other new business. So we're going to go into a recess. Then we will begin our board workshop where we will do fall planning. And then we will have a closed session for collective bargaining. This portion of the meeting is over. So should we just go right into the workshop?
That works for me.
Okay. All right.
It works for all of you. So,
Does it work for everybody? Maybe I need a break. We good?
I'm gonna just grab some water real quick, but I'll be
Yeah,
right
me
back.
too. I can hear you, but I'm just gonna stop videoing.
Okay, so how about just a couple minutes?
Okay.
Thank you, I'm back.
I'm looking for it. Fall planning. Oh, this is related to the document that we got the other day.
well, this is just kind of a conversation around, that document's probably part of everything, but it's really kind of just an update on where are we with the planning, what works. I'll let Brian talk in a little bit about the work that's been going on in the schools. I want to share kind of the work that's going on behind the scenes with respect to OSPI's guidelines and some of, not, I wouldn't say behind the scenes, but just kind of the conversations that are going on around the guidelines and the impact that that would likely have on us, or will likely have on us. And then I did share a document with you that we're wanting to put up and get out to our parents just with respect to the options that we're facing right now.
There it is. It was a link to the Google Docs. You're muted, Julie.
You want to go ahead and
There we
start?
go. Yeah, let's start.
Okay, so I had the webinar, I think it was maybe on the 14th, and then I think we met the following week. At the time, the initial belief was that the guidance that had been provided would allow for some flexibility around the meeting the goal, which the goal has been stated, I think, a number of times, of opening school with kids full time. And what has kind of evolved over the last week plus has been, I feel like we've been able to get more information from Superintendent Reichdahl, and his pretty much, I think, becoming much more clear from our perspective on what his view was of social distancing. Remember the very first day that the announcement came out, I think in his press conference, he talked a lot about, we'll be opening in the fall, we'll be opening in the fall. I think the language that initially came out was social distancing of 6 feet when reasonable or when feasible might have been the words. And then there was some updated language that came out that night from L&I that was more strictly, you're not only, obviously masks have been discussed a lot, but this 6 foot wasn't kind of a when feasible, it was a non-starter. And so where we started shifting with that conversation was working to, if we have strict social distancing of 6 feet with masks, without masks, there isn't any way that we could run full time in our secondary schools with respect to the size of the classroom and the space that's required in the classroom. And so that we're seeing that as very problematic. Now, before we had gotten too deep into this, Brian had started working with the buildings, with all of our folks, on having principals start to do the work. So the principal, and I'll let Brian talk a little bit about it, but I'm going to kind of big picture it. Brian had put out that word around the idea of us building a system in all of our buildings around full-time school in the fall, which the principals have worked on and been doing, and I'll let him report back. But it wasn't too long after that work initially went out that we were getting much different language and much different feedback from OSPI with respect to the guidelines and the Department of Health. And quite honestly, when Superintendent Reichdahl talks about the language in the guidelines, he pretty much defers to the Department of Health. The Department of Health are the ones making the decisions, and we're going by their guidelines. We had a conversation with our local superintendents, and I asked a question around how much does the Department of Health kind of review what's going on in other states with openings, and how do they review what's going on in other countries even with openings. And then there was a conversation, a question had come up about Seattle Public Schools, I think had publicly put something out saying they wouldn't be in school until they got to phase 4. They would come back to school when they got to phase 4, even though the phasing really doesn't tie to schools at all. But I asked the question, his response to that was that he didn't believe that anybody would get to phase 4 without a vaccine. So I asked him about surveys I had seen where maybe half the people are saying they may or may not be willing to even take a vaccine, for either people that just don't believe in vaccines or they're concerned about the speed with which they're putting them out. So I asked about that, whether kids would be required to have vaccines. And I asked about whether or not people were looking at what's happening in other states, because that creates data as well. And his response was, with respect to vaccines, he's not sure what the legislature would do. There are vaccine requirements. He would assume that there may be something with that. But with respect to the other states, his comment was that the Department of Health relies on the science. They don't rely on the ideology of other states to make determinations around science. So I just tell you what he said. What has happened, I think, since then is I think that there are legislators that believe that there maybe needs to be more review of some of the guidelines that have been put out. Brian had done some work last week that was forwarded on through Melissa, where we did a comparison kind of state guidelines across the country and looked at Massachusetts, looked at Illinois, looked at Connecticut, looked at Minnesota, looked at Delaware, looked at Maine. And in many of those states, their goal is to get kids back in school and to thinking about it from the perspective of safety, but also thinking about it from the perspective of having kids in school and what kids are losing by not being in school. At the same time, I know that our superintendents in this area have supported a review of the social distancing guidelines with respect to a document that was put out over the weekend from I think it's the American Association of Pediatric Doctors. And I can forward you the letter that was sent out, but it argues pretty strong. So it's the Association of Doctors arguing pretty strongly around the 3 feet is there's some science behind 3 feet with masks as well as 6 feet with masks. And so we don't know today. I guess I'm saying all that just from the perspective of we have these guidelines today. I know that there's pressure that will come to bear from legislative folks, from doctors, from parents, from all kinds to potentially look at that. So we continue to plan for really the 3 options that we shared and we've been talking about. One is we saw very clearly in the survey that we put out that there's maybe 15 to 20% of the parents that aren't comfortable sending their kids back. Distance learning is a significant option that we need to have available to us. We've heard everything we hear from OSPI is that enrollment will count for distance learning. There won't be any impact on us financially if you're distance learning or you're in-person learning. He talks a lot though about attendance. Like school funding has nothing to do with attendance, okay? So I'm not really sure why we talk a lot about attendance with respect to the funding for the distance learning. I think that there's an interest from the legislature, from others, to make sure that there's a connection. You're not enrolled and then you never connect. But attendance, when you hear about attendance, you start thinking about average daily attendance and funding based upon that, which is a whole different scenario. We're very hopeful that the distance learning continues as an option, because not only in Evergreen, but in almost every district, there's parents saying the same thing. They want that as an option. There was a question that I got this week with respect to what work have we done around enhancing 2.0. I'll let Brian talk a little bit about that, but certainly we've reached out on more than one occasion to parents and to staff to survey our parents and our families on what worked and what didn't work in our distance learning 1.0, and that has helped inform what distance learning 2.0 would look like. Again, I'll let Brian talk about that when we get to that point. The second model is the hybrid, like we've talked about. We've kind of already identified a A-B type of a hybrid model where students would go Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday, and distance learning the other days. And on that 5th day, which would be a Wednesday, our teachers would be working on planning and working with kids throughout the week, but planning for the following week. When I think about hybrids, I know I've had conversations with Camas, I've had conversations with Vancouver. I think they are saying some of the same types of things. I believe that Clark County, if that's the direction we have to go, which is a hybrid model, I do believe that the delivery model will look similar across the county. We meet weekly with county superintendents, Clark and Cowlitz County, to kind of talk through these areas. And we all try to make sure that we're communicating and at least somewhat being on the same page with what we're thinking. And then of course, the third model is in person. As we got more strict guidance in the guidelines from Superintendent Reichdahl, then the thought became, with smaller class sizes in the elementary school because of the funding from the state, that there's a potential around having full-time for elementary kids and hybrid for secondary if these strict guidelines remain. Our only issue is in 4th and 5th grade. The class sizes are a little bit bigger than they are in grades K through 3, but that's kind of the work that's kind of happening behind the scenes. There was a statewide Zoom with Superintendent Reichdahl today, and in that he talked about this template that the board will ultimately have to approve at least 2 weeks before school starts, being made available for review by districts on July 13th. So we're looking at a couple weeks. We should start to get some of that information in terms of what are they thinking and how should this look. In the meantime, our folks internally are continuing to work on the plan. So at that point, I'll stop and I'll let Brian kind of talk about the task that was provided to the principals and some of the work that's gone into that.
You're muted, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. So there really are two parts to talk about. One is the curriculum part, the 2.0, the distance learning, and then the other is the schools. Maybe we'll start with the schools. So as you guys all know, every school year has a life cycle. Typically, we're all just coming down from having great graduations and catch our breath when we think about next year, but this has been a much different year. So there's, for administrators, for teachers, for everyone, the year ended, but we really can't stop. So Mike's been, in a good way, pushing all of us to be very urgent. Like, we have to think about the fall. It's not that far away. And what we do know, it's unpredictable. So what we had every school do and is make their own plan. They all use the same template. Everything from health screening to what do you do if someone has COVID, to anything you can think of, drop off, pick up, every single piece of the school day if we had when we have students face to face. So all the schools worked on that. All the schools shared their plans with each other. I think we identified a lot of solutions and also some problems that we have to figure it out. Part of that is the PP&E. So Sue Steinbrenner is leading that charge. Even like, what does the classroom look like in elementary? Do we need dots certain places? How do we keep the social distancing? To hand cleaning, to do we need dividers? Do we need screens, temperature guns? So that's what the school plans look like. I feel really good about that. I know it's brought up more questions than answers, but I think collectively we got a lot smarter about it, and we're ready. We're much more ready for face-to-face learning in the fall. And again, I think we collectively feel really good about that. And schools will continue to tweak those plans, and as guidance changes, we have a district guidance piece. So every school is getting the same guidance. We also have a collection of documents, and so you can kind of see this. I know you all understand and see the significance, but I think we're up to 40 different documents now that principals are working with as they think about the school year. So everything from nutritional services to how it looks on a bus, how you do attestations, if we're going to have parents tell us that their kids are doing well, what that process looks like. So it's a very, very involved process. But on the school part, I think we feel really good that if the guidance comes that we can go full time and have everybody there, we'll be ready for that. I was out at Union today. We have groups of athletes that are in groups of 5 that are working out, and they have a COVID process. They all have masks on. They all get their temperatures taken before. All the coaches' temperatures are taken. And I was just talking to their AD, and he was real nervous about it, but it went really well. And that's a very small sample size from groups of 5 to 2,000 kids, but at the same time, it went well. So there's been a lot of planning, all different ways. There's a whole bunch of documents around what maybe it looks like for music, because we know that's another area and other electives. So that's kind of the school piece. I don't know if you have any questions around that.
I could ask you about music. We know the guidelines called for people to be careful about choir and other places where you're breathing deeply, and wondered what the thinking has been about that.
So Corinne's been doing a great job working on that. Again, she has documents for elementary and then K-12. And the guidance is changing all the time, but she has our best thinking right now. The idea is that we will have music and the arts. It might have to look a little different. We might not be able to, again, it depends what phase, right? But
yeah,
we might not be able to have large groups, but she's started making contingency plans of how that looks. In elementary, for example, one of the ideas is that the music folks push into the classrooms. We don't have kids moving all around the building, but the teachers would come to them. So I feel good about our plans as of today. And then Corinne is the one leading the charge on that.
And I know that there's a Google Doc that has a lot of it's got all the information in that we could share so that you can get in and dig in and take a look and see what work has been going on. And kind of Brian refers to all the documents. There's a lot of it's difficult because today there's one set of rules. Tomorrow, and Chris even said it, I can tell you this today, but like 2 hours from now, I don't know if it'll be something different than what it is. So I think most districts are hoping to have an ability to start talking publicly about what the plan is by the end of July, with the hope that we have better information from, or at least confirm nothing's going to change. Everybody wants to have their kids in school full time. There's no question about that. Everybody sees that is the optimum solution. It's just a question of whether or not it can happen based upon the size of classrooms and the number of kids in those classrooms. Brian talked about the word PP&E. So I got an email from Sue. The first purchase order is going to be the first order, not first purchase order, but the first order is going to be roughly $200,000. And we are working through Jennifer Jacobson in our purchasing accounting department. We have the opportunity to apply for FEMA grant to reimburse us for 75% of the cost of this. So we're working on that. Don't know exactly how it'll work out, but we've got masks, reusable masks. We've got disposable masks for adults and children. Freestanding hand sanitizer stands, bottles to fit the stands, thousands of bottles of hand sanitizer, tubs, 2,300 tubs of disinfectant wipes with 2,300 refills, isolation kits, gowns, gloves, hat, masks for nurses in case they need to have them, 200 plexiglass screens with transaction slot for secretaries in the offices, Velcro spots to put onto the carpet, like Brian was mentioning. We have some of our elementary schools that have milk dispensers to try to preserve milk. Well, we can't use milk dispensers because then you've got all these kids touching. Plus, the food is likely to be delivered to the classroom. So milk coolers now in those buildings that had milk dispensers, which milk dispensers were really pushed hard by the county, and rightfully so, as a conservation, so not throwing away so much milk. Now we have to do something else with that. We have to negotiate with ABM for an enhanced cleaning. So that $200,000 doesn't include ABM issues, furniture issues, signage, hand washing stations, I mean, and like Brian said, usually people are shutting down. There isn't any shutting down because we're working hard to make sure that our kids are served, because they're very likely to be in school, whether it's going to be 2 days a week or whether it's going to be 5 days a week. They'll be in school other than the kids that opt to do this remotely. But it's like monumental what is occurring in all with the backdrop of an $8.8 billion shortfall at the state level. So you got the situation where you have all these additional needs with significantly less money to make that happen, at least at the state level. And we have to see how that flows down to us. So it's a very challenging time. It's definitely a very challenging time. There's no question about that. But I would say that I appreciate, like Brian said, I feel like I am trying to push our folks to really think things through. And typically at the end of the year, people are ready to get a little bit of a break. And I think that everybody's stepped up and is doing exactly that. And I do see people taking a little bit of time off this summer, but I don't think it's going to be significant because we're going to be back at it again. And I think our principals generally come back right around the beginning of August anyway. So they may be getting a little bit of time the next week or two around the 4th, but people will be back, and we've got to be that's why our hope was to get that document I had shared that shows kind of these are the big picture looking at the 3 options that we have. Obviously not getting too much into the details yet because we still don't necessarily have them as we continue to work on them. But we would like to get that up on the website also so parents can at least see these are the 3 options and these are the safety things within the options when we're thinking about that. So that's kind of where we're at. Happy to answer any questions that we can.
Sounds a lot like you've taken it as far as it can be taken without making undue promises.
Yeah, I think that we can't promise anything right now because like Brian said, I think even to the point of if there was an outbreak, how do we react to it? I know the state has delayed anybody moving to phase 4. I know the county put in an application for phase 3. So we just kind of continue to monitor on a daily basis and keep planning and being ready for whatever might come our way. And at least knowing that we're going through it, we're not alone. I mean, there are 294 other districts in the state that are having to kind of work through the same stuff.
Well, I know the WASDA statewide calls that I've been on, the like Abigail Westbrook, the lawyer there, is so insistent on, and Tim Garshow too, are so insistent on not doing what Chris Reichdahl did at his first press conference by announcing something that sounded final so that everybody just kind of turned off their Zoom meetings and assumed that we'd be back to normal. And I don't see the epi curves changing so that we can be back to normal even here.
I think the only way that we could be normal if with social distancing at 6 feet, we may be able to still do elementary. We're looking at that full time, but secondary, no way. The only way that we really, I think, would be able to go full time is if there's some change with respect to the guidelines around social distancing. And there is science, 6 feet is better. So 3 feet is good, 6 feet is better. So one's better and one's best. And when you match it with that was kind of the gist of the AAP letter, was that there are kids suffering every day from not being at school, and that should be part of the considerations as well. And then just thinking about the actual experience and data with respect to how kids are affected by the virus as opposed to adults as we move through the spectrum. So I think that was a lot of the work behind their pushing hard. I believe our state's medical association supports what the Pediatric Association put out. So we just have to kind of continue to see. I know there are legislators, fairly influential legislators, that are very interested in kids being in school full time as well. But it's June, so we just have to keep watching, see what will happen.
Yeah.
Mike, you mentioned the masks. So that order had how many disposable masks?
The order had 6,000 reusable adult-sized cloth masks, which
Okay.
is almost equivalent to 2 per staff member. 17,500 disposable adult-sized masks for visitors and students in schools and on buses, things like that. 12,500 disposable child-sized masks. And then we've got some of our community partners making, some of our faith-based partners making, I think, 5,000 that they're going to be delivering to us as well. And there have been a lot of people that have done that work and been very supportive. But yeah, I mean, just that, you're talking about 30,000 disposable masks. And, because, if kids don't have masks, we have to provide them with masks. This, I don't believe for a minute that would last us. I don't even know how long that would last us.
Well, that was my question, I guess, because on the disposable mask for students, I'm assuming that the preferred method would be that students bring their own cloth mask, and that
Correct.
we have disposables if somebody forgets their mask, or right,
More of a backup, right?
Yeah, because I work in an office where people forget their mask. It happens with adults, and so I imagine that kids are going to forget their masks. And the 17,000, that'll go fast.
Yes,
With
I would
25,000 students.
I would agree with that. And it's expensive. This budget for this school year, our budget for 2021, will be a difficult budget already. And this will make it more difficult. We have the CARES money helping us this year for the budget next year. I've talked many times about our fund balance being higher than we would have expected it to be in 1920, and that would help us mitigate issues as we move forward. And I think both of those things will help us get to the point of balancing the budget. And, when we build the budgets, always they're a little bit more conservative than what you see happening in the school year. But 2021 it will be a difficult year, and there's so many unknowns. There's just so many unknowns. I think the difficult thing also is, I think we are a very transparent district. I think we've always worked hard to do that. And in some respects, without any kind of guidance from OSPI that there's some sort of hold harmless with respect to enrollment, we really don't have a good sense of what's going to happen when we get back together in September with respect to enrollment. We had already built in, I think about 400 student drop in enrollment. But we just don't know. There was a survey that we had put out kind of asking parents their views of in-person versus distance learning. And I think we had something like 3,000 responses to that. And of those, it was maybe 15+% that were interested in distance learning rather than on in-person. Of course, 3,000 out of 24,000 kids. It's not like it's 3,000 still quite a few people. But the within the 15% that were saying that they were interested in some sort of different learning than in person, there was ALE options, there was distance learning option, but then there was also an option of we're not coming back. And I think that 10% of those 15% were saying that we don't anticipate coming back. And I don't know if that means they're going to another district and it's a natural number that we see people come and go, or they're just so concerned just in general about what's happened. So that's my biggest concern is it's not my biggest, it's a concern is when, we try to be transparent, we try to communicate, but it's hard to do that if you don't know exactly what's going to happen until day one. And then every day that you don't take some sort of action is one more day that you spent money on the way. So we will have to have a lot of conversations. I think I've talked to each of you at least at some point about a community, like, I wouldn't necessarily say a budget committee, but almost like an advisory type of a committee that we would create. I think that it would be very wise for us to start the work now of the outreach with our community and get that established so that when we come back in, let's say, mid-October, we can start having those conversations with, and it could certainly, it will start with a budget conversation, but I think over time it evolves into any type of an advisory. It could be what's the community feedback on the equity work that's gone on? What's the community feedback? I mean, that type of an ongoing committee. I kind of see this start of it looking a lot like, Rob, the committee that you served on in, I think it was the fall of 2008, as we started to face the kind of shortfalls. Because I think 2021 will be difficult. I think 2021 and 21-22 will both be difficult, just because of all of the pressures and challenges that we're facing. And then on top of that, the uncertainty with just kind of what are the school years going to look like. So it's like you feel like you're working hard, but there isn't. And I was having Tammy Gassaway, who worked for the district for 32 years. She retired today. So we went out for lunch today, and she was like, well, once we just get through this little bit of we're kind of having to deal with a lot now, but then things will calm down. And we also had a couple other people with us, and it was kind of like, the comment was, yeah, but when has it ever slowed down? I mean, when does it ever feel like, it doesn't feel like it ever, and I know you live it too, so when does it ever really slow down? Well, we just got to get through this one, and then it'll be calm. It doesn't calm down, because I see this will be something that goes on for a period of time, and then on top of that, we'll probably be dealing with budget situations, going through that work on. So, this is what we do, and we got to do our best to communicate it and make good decisions, and always keep in mind who?
Yeah.
The kids. We wouldn't exist if it wasn't for kids being in our schools. I mean, we would exist, but we wouldn't have the jobs we have if it wasn't for the kids.
I'm okay. Yeah, I really appreciate all of that. I'm sensitive to part of the guidance, and it's kind of feels like it's buried in the 2,000 million page document that first came out a month ago, the big one.
Yeah.
Is that there's a line in there, or a whole section, can't remember, about making sure that the most disadvantaged kids, the kids who need school every day the most, have that opportunity, even if we have to go to a hybrid model for everybody else. I'm thinking about life skills. I'm thinking about like whatever's taking the place of SMP classrooms, the students who need the heaviest and most impactful supports. I wondered what the thoughts were around that, because we also know those classrooms are going to be almost impossible to mask from time to time.
I think that with respect to our ELL and our special needs kids, I know that there's already work going on, Jay, within the special services area, looking at how do you identify those kids that you're exactly talking about, with not even how. I mean, I think they probably already have a pretty good idea of how do we serve them more often than those days. And so that really is a lot of the work that's going into that as well. If we do end up in a hybrid, depending on how many kids choose distance learning versus remote, you I think would have potential flexibility. Again, how many kids, if you had a secondary class of, let's say 25, 26 kids, and it was split into 13, but you have a maximum of, let's say 16, 17 kids, or whatever that number. I guess, first of all, if you had a class of 26, there's not a guarantee that all those 26 will be doing school on site. Some of those might be so if you had 10, 15% of those kids, you could have anywhere from 3 to 5 kids, to the point that you've got down to maybe 20, 21 that are the Monday, Thursday. And if you're then at 10-ish, you have the ability to identify who you see as the kids that are the most at risk, and fill that classroom up to the capacity. So I do think that even within a middle school, high school hybrid, there would be some kids that would be going full-time. And that definition of full-time would be 4 days a week, because that 5th day we wouldn't have. But even on the 5th day, there's opportunities to bring kids in for special programs or special services that they might need. So there's been a lot of work, and Brian maybe can elaborate on that too, if it wasn't the perfect answer I gave. But there is certainly work going into that and trying to determine exactly how do we serve kids more often than 2 days a week that need that.
The only thing I would add, I mean, it's obvious to us all, but when you look at distance learning, we got the feedback from parents, from families, from community, from teachers. The most challenging, the group that had the most challenge with distance learning were our elementary students. So obviously that's one of the reasons if we can go full-time, we're going with elementary kids first so they can be there. And we feel good about the 2.0. Curriculum instruction has done a lot of work. We have some new tools for teachers. It's going to be a much simpler picture if you're a student or a parent in the fall on distance learning, but at the same time, we know for those elementary kids, it's very, very challenging, and parents and for everybody, but you know, at least in the secondary, kids are used to Google Classroom, so we can build on that. And we saw in what we've got feedback was just that it was very complicated, very confusing, and took a lot of time, and sometimes not a lot of bang for the buck in elementary. So again, that's one of the reasons we see that's a place we need to start with full-time first if we can.
So I think we will be having some form of meeting about every week. And so we will continue to update. And as soon as anything new comes out, I know that Melissa's very active from her perspective on working to help us find ways to have our kids back full as safely and appropriately as we can.
Now, I've had conversations with 2 legislators about this. I spoke with Monica Stonier a couple Thursdays ago. The day that she gave your seminar, we ran into each other on Zoom. And then Linda Wilson. In the sense that I have from them is that they're pretty much asking the same questions as any of the rest of us, is that there's still a lot of unknowns and things. It sounded like, at least from an advocacy standpoint, we are going to need to engage, and we're going to need to have the same voices between all the different W groups, and that there's not going to be a lot of appetite for don't cut this, don't cut that kind of rhetoric. They're more interested in hearing about shared sacrifice, and if this proposal is or that proposal is going to be better or least bad for the cuts that are coming. Going to be speaking with Paul Harris, just kind of the same thing, just like what's going on in the moment for you. And I don't know, whoever else, we can figure it out. I know you and I, Mike, have talked about having the ledge rep sit in on calls with Melissa Gomboski. And if you're doing that, and you want me to be a fly on the wall, I'm still volunteering.
Yeah, well, we haven't had any. Basically, all we've been doing is just meeting with the superintendents for the most part, and then it's just kind of conversations on the side with her. We haven't had any specific meetings.
Okay.
I think I mean, obviously, with respect to the budget, all legislators are very important in that. I think with respect to the guidelines, it's being driven from the Department of Health. It feels as if the governor and the OSPI superintendent have deferred authority to the Department of Health. And that's where they're getting their guidance from. So yeah. I think any kind of lobbying efforts, certainly if they're from doctors and folks like that, I think that's where a lot of it's being directed. And I think there are legislators directing it that way as well. But, you know, they're obviously doing what they think is best for their purposes. And I think we're just trying to raise questions and try to figure out our way. Monica, Representative Stonier, Representative Harris, both of them have been on Zoom calls. I've had a call with Senator Cleveland as the chair of the Senate Health Committee. I think that she's supportive, but it ends up, it's conversations behind closed doors that we're not really part of, and we just have to see how it all evolves. I think it was help. Honestly, Brian put together a nice document that I shared with Brian's looking a little angelic with that light over his head right now.
I'll say.
We shared that, and what we really were trying to do was share, not ideological, like it's Arizona and what Florida and what Texas are doing. We tried to show what Minnesota and Illinois, states that are blue states, what are they doing? And I've raised this at every Zoom meeting that we've had. Is when we continually talk about the science, it feels as if the science is all cut and dried, but if the science was cut and dried, we wouldn't have 150 different versions of science. So I don't need to say it anymore. But
I don't think it's 100. I don't think it's all these different science. It's different willingness to comply with what you have to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's different interpretations of the science, or different, different. It does become political at some point, which is why it's if we're looking at, I don't think most people have thought that, well, I'll just leave politics out of it. It's work. We're continuing to we just want our kids to be in school safely. It's important for them to be in school. We've all had kids. And then some of us still have kids in school. And so we know what they're losing when they're not in school. And that's no disrespect to any of the staff that we have in our district who've worked their butts off to put together a distance learning model that was tremendous in a week to 2 weeks time frame. And so they continue to work to try to improve it. It's just a very difficult situation.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed a lot of teachers really struggled with the technology. I struggled with the technology, and that's kind of saying something. Not that it was bad technology or anything like that. It's Google Classroom. It is what it is. But is there a component of these plans that includes some additional supports for our less tech savvy teachers? My son had a teacher who calls his cell phone Satan, that kind of thing. Just not interested, and then suddenly in the need of using the stuff every single day is the burden on the teachers, is what I'm thinking about.
Well, I would say there's a couple things that are going to be an improvement. One, starting in the fall, now Google Classroom, if you were a teacher at secondary, you'd put your grades, you'd have an assessment, you'd put those grades into Google Classroom, then you'd have to re-enter them into Skyward. So then that was just a nightmare for parents, because parents in our district are used to being able to look at Skyward and get automatic updates, kind of know where their student's at, they can see that. In the fall, that'll be synced. So we got a Google Beta Sync, so that's one of the new tools for teachers. So if you're a secondary teacher, you'll have to enter grades once, and it'll immediately be in Google Classroom and in Skyward. So that'll help parents a lot, at least, because I know part of it is that feedback loop they were used to Skyward. I think
that function's been promised for Skyward for years.
Well, it is happening. The Google Sync, that'll sync with Google Classroom. We're looking at we're trying to make it easy for the user. Now, if we have some full-time face-to-face or hybrid, our hope is the kids and the families that choose distance learning have had success with it. If you looked at Home Choice Academy and the feedback from their parents, and we've looked at that, they thought it went really well, almost overwhelmingly, but they had already chosen the Home Choice Academy model, some of it where it's face-to-face, and then some of it where the parent is like the learning partner. So one of our hopes is that we can, when parents decide, do I want to go distance learning or hybrid or whatever the options are, there'll at least be some kind of face-to-face. But if you choose distance learning, we're hoping that you've already had success, or you're kind of committed to it, rather than, oh, I have to do this, and then you run into problem after problem after problem, which is a different kind of experience. And you say, okay, we can make this work. We want to be a part of it. So that's another piece. And then as far as the teachers, curriculum instruction has one of our goals is to have K-12 Google Classroom. So we already have plans for the elementary teachers that use Seesaw this year, so that everyone has that kind of training. Also, our hope is if you have older siblings, that you can show your first or second grade brother or sister or the parent how to do Google Classroom, because our kids at secondary level are pretty they're pretty good with, they're pretty fluent with that. So those are just some of the things we're working on.
Okay.
So we'll come back and update you again at the board meeting next week. See
Sounds
what we've
good.
learned in the last week.
Any other questions for Mike or Brian? No?
Has there been any OPMA change announcements or the?
You know, he talked on, Garchow talked on the Zoom today that they're still waiting for some more interpretation. So it didn't seem like in his comments that it was necessarily settled on exactly what's going on. So
Okay.
we'll have to keep monitoring that to see exactly what happens here in the next, because I think our thought was that next week's meeting would maybe be in person.
But we're not sure yet.
I don't think we are sure. I think that Lori and I were thinking today that it would, but I felt like his answer on the thing today didn't really give a clear direction on that. So we'll have to check. We'll have to reach back out and check.
I do feel like at some point, that might be the first step in people's confidence. I did see somebody post something about like, if your district leaders, meaning like, and it was more kind of directed at like Reichdahl and all of the Zoom meetings across the state, like if they can't even meet in person, then how are we expecting our students to get back in the classroom? So, you know, I'm all ready for us to get back and meet in person. So the sooner the better.
I've missed you all. I agree with you. I've missed you.
Yeah. Just, you know, just like you said earlier, it doesn't feel like you can have as effective meetings. And if we can't have effective meetings, we know that our kids are better off with in-person instruction and that, you know, collaboration that they're missing from their
Well, we could be in
classmates.
phase 3 if they were to act on this, which I believe allows up to 50 people to be in a room, but I don't know if that still is required social distancing. So you could have 50, but you could have a big enough place to make that happen. So there's still a lot of work, but we definitely, I agree, it'd be wonderful to be able to get back in person again.
Yep.
Makes the card ride to the meeting a little bit shorter though. There's that.
It's true.
All right. Well, thank you. So I think that's the only thing that was on our workshop this evening was fall planning. We're going to go into a closed session. So we're going to go ahead and adjourn this part of the meeting. We're going to call into a different line.